Thanks very much, Karen. Yeah, the Special Collections Room is very special for me. It was when I was trying to find Canadian sonnets, I did a lot of digging, and a lot of that digging took place in this very room as I randomly took out Canadian poets' books, many of whom I'd never heard of before, to see if they had written sonnets. So I spent hours and hours in here in the middle of the last decade researching that book. As Karen said, I'm planning to read from a book that is not yet published. It's a small chapbook. I'm not going to read from it. I'm going to read it in its entirety. That's the nice thing about a chapbook. It lends itself to reading length. So I won't be, this is a bit of an experiment. I'm not going to introduce any of the poems with any sort of banter. I'm just going to start at the beginning and read through to the end, and hope it holds your attention. Ego sum. I am the lord, the thief, and the vassal. Water I morph to fit any vessel. Wherever I am, I speak like a local. I sift like ash through grates and then settle. I mimic and ape. I'm brash and I'm subtle. An alloy forged from 10,000 metals. I am the stove, the pot, and the kettle. I patch over holes like plaster and spackle. I am the block, and I am the tackle. I am a torrent, and I am a trickle. I am the treacherous course through a tickle. I am most busy when I am most idle. I am the whip, the bit, and the bridle. I am the bolt, the hinge, and the knuckle. I am a belt in search of its buckle. I am the stamen, the pistil, the petal. I am the jot, and I am the tittle. I'm obliging, yes, but no one's lick spittle. I'm jackpine, cat spruce, cedar, and maple. I am the stake, the stitch, and the staple. I am the storm, the stallion, the stable. I can cram worlds in the cup of a thimble. I'm gauche and immodest. I'm shy and I'm humble. I am fraught silence preceding a battle. I am the fang and I am the rattle. I am the Talmud and I am the Bible. I am all manner of slander and libel. I have been Cain and I have been Abel. I am the feast and I am the table. I am the dirge of the Tower of Babel. I'd speak the truth, but I doubt that I'm able. Proscenium. I know nothing of the role I play. Rolling over, I raise a middle finger to the day whose light pours through the slats of my Venetian blinds and pounds me with its brickbats and reproofs. This is proof that I exist, despite the fact the timepiece on my wrist no longer ticks, and the calendar page has read September since I can't remember when. Rage against the coming of the light gets you nowhere fast, but the blood it sets in motion lets you feel a little something. From the parlor comes the rhubarb buzz of conversation. Drums rumble in the pit. I rise and shuffle into the day, knowing nothing of the role I play. To the superb lyrebird, that cover band of the Australian bush. Mountebank dancer and manic mimic, is there a bush ruckus your syrinx can't clone? Bubbly cork pops and glass clinks at picnics. Kookaburras cackle when its cover is blown. Alarm panic siren wail, chainsaw drone. Motor drives whir and apertures click as it captures your likeness. Trigger snick and barrel blast of the shot that missed home. Honey eaters chitter and moth wings flutter. Snoring koalas and colicky babies. The lunatic howl of a dingo with rabies. Wind bang stutter of a torn loose shutter. All the ringtones of a cellular phone. No song you can't sing, but no song your own. Anatta. Sorry, I'm not myself today. Lately, I think I never am. I was yesterday beside myself, and from that angle I could see the cracks and fissures, the stitches and seams. So it seems this swarming hive of cells, each a self that buds and blossoms and browns, has some unified purpose, but fact is, they're merely consigned to a cubicled lifetime, till they die and return for more of the same. And so, I am reborn, even before I'm buried and broken down into dirt. If today I'm not myself, it's because I'm busy being everything else. Waypoints for Elizabeth Bishop. Comes a time, traveler, to rest your bones by the roadside, to stretch out in a flowered ditch, catch your breath, and watch the patterned play of sunlight and shadow on the membranes of your eyelids. A few minutes or an hour if needed. Comes a time at a trivial junction to pause and reconnoiter, reconsider flight plans and waypoints, wait for someone with a wagon to pass by and offer you a ride wherever it is they're going. Comes a time when the skies dyed rose and darkening, to find a roof or some other form of warmth and shelter that might, on waking, be mistaken for a home. Baffle. When every little sense intense, intensity itself grows tedious. Not all sensations can be sensational should one remain whole and sane. Holy thoughts and sacred sentiments must be consigned to holidays where they belong, so that the mundane and unremarkable might also grow. I know a woman who can hear an ant worrying a seed deep within a fissure on a beam. This doesn't lead to rapture. It causes pain. I take a walk around the garden walls I've built as baffle to the fascinating marvels of my life. Underwhelmed, if that's a word, with apologies to Sloan. I'd say the book was disappointing, but I had no expectations of its excellence, so that would be misleading. I'd say my team's performance fails to satisfy, but its salary and management point to precisely such a mediocre season. I'd complain about the weeds that choke my garden, but their presence is testament to my indifferent stewardship. I'd say inadequate is not the aptest word to summarize the manifest insufficiencies of life here as we know it, but I can think of nothing better at the moment. Squalid. Squalid always spools my thoughts to seagulls, filthy squallers that they are, like that one, swooping down to send the starlings squawking off their supper on the lawn, which gives me pause, recalling as I do the dollars squandered down urinal drains in bars of dubious repute, and the loveless fucks that often followed last call's hollow wattage, which makes me think, despite myself, of babies and bad weather, and water drops dripping through roof thatch to puddle in a dark corner of a daub and wattle hut. And so my thoughts sprawl out to all the soiled, the poor, the crawling, stolid things this planet stores and harbors from the storm and void, and then contract to rest or stall on the scroll of sordid squibs that I have scrawled. Vasopressin. The prairie vole's a faithful mate, the montane vole a man-whore. But jigger with the latter's genes just so vasopressin secreted during sex hits receptors in the neural sweet spot, and the egregious slut becomes a prairie home companion, never more to heed his pecker's wanton will. Vasopressin is an anti-diuretic. A script will help recidivist pissabeds keep their duvets dry at night. I have a soft spot for certain diuretics that tickle my brain's pleasure dome and make me prone to indiscretions. I get no buzz from steady love. Perhaps a hormone dose or some slick shuffle of my chromosomes would fix me up and keep me out of trouble. Maybe then I'd be the man you always wanted. One and one. For every one there is a one, and one make one, divided. For every one a one must die, and every death is one, provided every other is a one, and one is every other. An other and a one make one, husbanded and brided. The union of a one and one makes other, suicided. Self-murder of the one in one is mother to the other one, and one another's one in ones conspire to smother other ones, while lovers wire their one in ones implacably together. One is bound and gagged by one saws and frays the knot of one, and one lets slip the tether. Broken. Broken again. Again I lie broken by barley and far. A corvid croaking draws dawn from behind ocean's smoking horizon. Moon, that grimy old token, clatters into its slot. No word spoken now could cradle my aching. No cloaking device keep in the raw wattage poking beams through my stitches. I've been awoken nights, more than I can name, by your breath's pause, and lain with my ear to your mouth, love. With others and others, I'd lie before you, broken, awake, but bound by no laws, I'd steal out, my departure a lie of omission. Even words left unspoken aren't true. The wound. It didn't bleed, but would seep a bit of lymph on Sundays. It could be kept covered by clothes, but liked to be exposed as much as possible, though fresh air did little to close it. It was a portal, a wormhole between the time of its infliction and infinite points in the future. It breathed, and if, in perfect stillness, you inclined your ear toward its puckered lips, you'd swear it muttered in a foreign tongue. Somehow, it staved off infection, was odorless but for a faint floral whiff. Once, I saw a hummingbird moth hover above it, then bury her proboscis deep in the folds. I. Such a slim barrow into which to stuff a life. Such a narrow beam to cross and brace the walls. Pollarded and shallow-rooted, it resists the winds, persists despite its pruning. Stiff and stolid in its ramrod stance, it stands, but shifts and strays when no one's watching. It sees the road ahead, but is always looking back. It asserts and it equivocates. It makes mistakes. It flirts with grief and grace. It wears a mask to hide its missing face. Thank you very much. And I will turn things over to Rachel Lebowitz.
Thanks. Okay, so Zach and I write really differently. And I will have a fair amount of explanations for mine. Starting with the title. I'm going to be reading from Cottonopolis, which just came out a couple weeks ago. And Cottonopolis was the nickname for Manchester during the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. It was the world's first industrial city, and people would come from all over England and other countries such as France to see it. It was kind of known as the shock city of the age, so disaster tourism at its finest. And so I first was going to write about life in the world's first industrial city, but as I did more research into the Industrial Revolution, I discovered that I really couldn't write about the industrial city without also writing about slavery. Slavery funded the Industrial Revolution, for one thing. That's where a lot of the money came to build the mills and the quarries and some of the inventions, such as James Watt's first steam engine. So there's quite a lot of this book covers the slave trade and life in the United States. And it sort of ends with the American Civil War. For today, I'm going to mostly focus on Lancashire, and then I'm going to move to the United States. Okay. I've structured the book so that every piece, every prose poem is an exhibit, like a museum exhibit. And this first one that I'm going to read is the third one in the book. It's called Exhibit 3, Nursery Rhyme 1. And what you might need to know to start off is scavengers was the name of the youngest child laborers in the factories. Their job was they were underneath the big mechanized spinning wheels, and they would have to sort of crouch under and pick up the fluff before it got caught in the machines. So that's what scavengers were. Clem was a Lancashire slang word for starve. Quietness was a type of syrup that had opium in it that was given by factory women to their children so that they could then go work in the factories. So that a lot of the babies ended up having drug overdoses. And Angel Meadow was the name of the worst slum in Manchester. So. Exhibit 3, Nursery Rhyme 1. Little lad, where was thou born? Far off in Lancashire, under a thorn, where they sup sour milk from a ram's horn. Where flies lay eggs in rotting meat, where sand becomes sugar and warehouse sweepings tea, where pots are brought for pissing in 3 times a day, where scavengers are not birds, where children clem and cry what they'd give for a piece of sky. Where fluff ends up in lungs and in the curls of girls, where heads are shaved, where faces, necks are blue with dye, where they sell 5 gallons of quietness a week, where babies are nothing but bone and grit, where little lads get littler bit by bit, where the flowered stream turns to mud and shit and steam, where half-gone cats bob and sink, where people drink, where, good heavens, the smell, where they stuff up the keyholes with rags, where the streets are silent and only the groaning of mills, where Irwell Irk medley Tib rush black and slick, where he fixed the earth upon arches and pillars and the flames of hell flow under it, where the rain, where Angel Meadow, oh, for some green grass, where the dead rose, where the thorn and the thorn and the thorn, where little boy blue stopped blowing his horn, where we walk away from slum and pit, where the coffin is for us because we have nothing to do with it. The next one, a lot of the wealthy really didn't stop to wonder if the children were that well treated when they had to work in the factories, because they were just so happy that no one was stealing from their orchards. And so that's what this one's about. Lord Suffield is a type of apple, and scrumpers is a word for people who steal things from fruit and vegetables, but mainly apples. Okay. Exhibit 4, apple. Here's a Lord Suffield, raised some years back by Thomas Thorpe, handloom weaver on the Lord's estate. Very large, nearly white, with a slight tinge of red next the sun. Flesh tender, juicy, brisk. The scrumpers are in factories now. Scavengers lie motionless under moving mules, then snatch the cotton waste. Piecers dash up and mend the broken threads. They trudge home in the dark, their hands still piecing in their sleep. Such howling wind, such murky light, Suffield shakes. Autumn soot-specked windfall rots. So when I was doing research for this book, it was obviously kind of difficult to find the joy in the research. But I did find a lot of hope in the amount and quality of the workers' resistance. So these next pieces are about machine breakers. This first one refers to machine breaking that happened over the course of 4 days in East Lancashire in 1826. And in those 4 days, over 1,000 power looms were destroyed. Exhibit 6, scrap cloth. He bangs into the stool, giggles and begs for more. Pinning, pinning. And again the father spins, holding his son's wrists, looking at the mouth's wide grin. Light seeps in, motes of dust, thick layers of it on the loom, lint on his son's long lashes, pink geranium in bloom. I will do anything for you. Every Sunday your brother goes to church with a penny for his own funeral. Your sister sucks on your mother's wizened breast. From behind the root market, your cousin steals scraps of rotting Swedes. And the cries, those small, thin mews, they hit the dirt walls. They go on, and you want it to stop until it does. And then you'd give anything for it to start again. So we march, we petition, we break windows, we pelt the manufacturers with stones. The soldiers come towards us, their swords shining. They tell us to turn back. But we're starving, we say, and they open their haversacks and give us their sandwiches, and then they trot away. And our boys rise early to turn the grindstone. And so we sharpen our pikes, we smash the frames, we cut the driving belts, the women slash the warps and woven cloth. And the girls, oh, the girls, they tear the yarn off the beams and throw twist out the window into the river below. We are thousands. Look at your mum ripping that cloth with her cracked hands. The warps are raised onto a pike and carried out to the field. Cheers on our voice and song and the hot sun on these bright faces. And see the way that cloth looks, floating down. It's like part of the sky is falling, spinning round and round. The next one is about many things, but the reference right at the end to Ludd's arsenal is a reference to the Luddite rebellions. There were rumors after those who were not caught and sent to jail or to Australia, transportation. There were rumors that they had merely hidden their weapons underground and that they would dig them up for future insurrections. Exhibit 7, Clawed Earth. There is a generation, oh how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. Clouds, clouds, raven, rook, but below, why 'tis invisible. And muck misers creep out with their bulging bags of dirt. They pull apart privies and leave night soil behind. Gaslight pale upon these slimy streets. Now under the surf, sharks and slaves shimmer of black into the deep. And on deck, biscuits so full of vermin they move by themselves. And sailors so far away on this vast sea as to be forgotten. And miners so far down as to be lost, little moles with stiff paws. And those who are found are taken out and laid in turf, their mouths to the fresh-churned earth. And newspapers say not of explosions, should readers be disturbed. Hush, hush, pillow of white paper. There is a generation whose teeth are as swords and their jaw teeth are as knives to devour the poor. But there are mutterings on the moors. And in the public houses, men stare into their pints and are passed over, and Ludd's arsenal is hidden thus, deep amongst the quiet roots. But sword, pike, gun, knife, 'twill all be used again. This one, there's a reference to Will Huskinson. William Huskinson was the MP for Liverpool who was liberal, but became known as the first person in the world to be run over and killed by a train, which actually happened on the very first day of the world's first passenger railway trip. So, I first came across a reference to him in a Julian Barnes essay where he said he was frozen into instructive cameo about the dangers of progress, which I thought was such a brilliant line. So what happened was he had had a lot of political differences with Prime Minister Wellington, the Duke of Wellington, and he went over to talk to him, and he was on the rails, and nobody really had any understanding of how fast these trains could go, and there was another engine coming. It was like 20 miles an hour. And another engine came, and they said, get out of the way, and he couldn't get away in time, and it crushed his leg. And he was then taken in one of the engines. The train was going from Liverpool to Manchester, and the rest of the people went back to Manchester, but he was taken to a doctor, and he died later that night. The rest of this piece is actually about a cholera epidemic in 1832, but there's a reference to William Huskinson, who died 2 years previous in 1830. Exhibit 30, map Allen's Court. Any hour now, it could sneak in. We watch the canals, quivers of light on black waters. Madness to stand here, eyes peeled on boats lumbering through the locks, while thousands saunter unnoticed down arterial roads and iron rails. 2 years ago, a cannon blast began this trip. Cladding hit a bystander, eyeball halfway down his cheek, and Will Huskinson dead. Silence! Cholera vans rattling through these filthy streets. And see William Bostock's rotting body. Stand at the River Irk, choleric, one died, damned, and damning river. Look, tripe boiler here, catgut manufactory over there, and opposite, the skinneries with burial ground behind. Handy, that. Crazy Bess lies out on the bare flags of the alley and tries to sleep. In lodging number 12 Blakely Street drinks Long Jim, called thus for his skill in swallowing swords. And here lives Crutched Jack, over there Elizabeth McCullum, powerloom weaver, 8 months gone with child. Dyers, jugglers, coach painters, washerwomen, cobblers, hawkers, cutters, trampers, dressmakers, sawyers, vagabonds, all, and all in a state of collapse. In August, the rains come. They soak into this ghost of grass. Oh, Angel Meadow. On one side the door, puddle full of excremental matter. On the other, children raise their gossamer wings. Okay, I'm just going to move now to the United States, right before and during the American Civil War. This one is, I don't really consider this one much of a poem. It's kind of more of a short essay. Exhibit 35, Cain. Let me tell you a story. During the war, there was a mass exodus. Seemed like everybody in the world was going to Texas. Every time you walked down the road, you had to move to the side to let the wagons pass. Cattle worn to bone, master on horseback, men with ankles chained. Pickaninnies staring out from the back of the mud-splattered wagon, their dark eyes peeping between the chairs. You'd sit on the bank of the Sabine and see that long line of covered wagons, miles and miles of them, crossing that river and going west with all they got left out of the war. You'd sit there in the sun, chewing a long blade of grass. Shade your eyes with your hand, wipe your sleeve across your nose. Cicada, cicada, see 3 ants crawl over your toes. What matters? The mud, the snotty sleeve, a broken wagon wheel. Crow that watched from the top of the sycamore. History's a croaking caw. Over here, here, we are here, we here, here. In New Orleans before the war, steamboats were packed so tight you could hop from deck to deck, one end of the city to the other. And that makes me think of Antietam, of how the dead lay so thick upon the ground you'd walk for a mile or more before you could touch the earth. And that makes me think of the rich loam and how it takes millions of years to make and only a few years to exhaust. And that makes me think of the slaves moved from the dead tobacco plantations of the Chesapeake to the new cotton states of the South. From the bank of the Mississippi, a child watched. Cows chewed their cud, flicked their ears at gnats. The boy sucked on sweet cane. Cane's a word that has many tales, but what I want to close with is this. 9 years before the war began, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts gave a speech condemning the authors of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed residents there to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. "It is a rape of a virgin territory," he roared, "with hirelings picked from the drunken spew and vomit of an uneasy civilization." Andrew Butler, Senator of South Carolina, recovering at home from a stroke, now has a new mistress, the harlot, slavery. 3 days later, South Carolina's Congressman Preston Smith Brooks walked into the Senate chamber where Sumner was writing letters. "Mr. Sumner, I have read your speech twice over carefully. It is a libel on South Carolina and Mr. Butler, who is a relative of mine." And with that, he took his cane with its fine gold head and beat Sumner with it. The blood ran in his eyes. Sumner finally got free and staggered up the aisle where he collapsed unconscious. Brooks beat till the cane broke. What stays with me is not the 3 years it took for Sumner to recover, nor the sight of his empty chair in the Senate, nor that the night before the attack, a pro-slavery group in Kansas ransacked homes and burned the abolitionist hotel, newspaper offices, and printing presses, nor that 2 nights after, Kansas abolitionists led by John Brown hacked 5 men to death. No. What stays are the canes. Afterwards, dozens of them were sent to Brooks with notes attached. "Good job." I see them on the desk in the corner of the room, piles of them bundled like faggots. white canes, brown, and a gold-headed one sent by the University of Virginia's Literary and Debating Society. And cane, held in the hand of a boy as he watches the coffle move south. Watch the steamboats pass. They're filled with thousands of bales of cotton, barrels upon barrels of sweet. After the Battle of Gettysburg, there were so many bodies still on the fields that people in the town of Gettysburg would walk around carrying vials of peppermint oil and pennyroyal because the smell was so disgusting. So they would just hold it up to their nose. Exhibit 36, Nursery Rhyme 2. Willie boy, where are you going? I will go with you if I may. I am going to the meadow to see them a-mowing. I am going to help them make the hay. They mowed us down like grass, in the fields, in the meadows, in the churches, in the houses, in the orchards, in the tents, in the hills. And whip, whip-poor-will, carrion crow sat on an oak, sing hey-ho, the carrion crow. There are brains amongst the brambles and the brakes, the shovels and the rakes. 58 Johnnies thrown in the well, and down and down and down they fell. There's Fort Hell and Slaughter Pen. There's all the dead horses and all the dead men. Gawkers come when battle's done. There was an old woman who had 3 sons, Jerry and James and John. Jerry was hung, James was drowned, John was lost and never was found. Hippity, hippity, hippity hop. Embalmers grabbed them off the fields, then put them in their shops. Months after Gettysburg, and still the people there carry vials of peppermint oil, pennyroyal. The rooms are black with widow's weeds, the cotton's choked with weeds. Hickety-pickety, my black hen, we walk upon the stumps of men. Handguns, rifles, swords a-quiver, broken bales upon the river, bodies white and bodies brown, case and grape shot mow us down. And I'm going to end with a dramatic monologue about the cotton famine. The cotton famine happened in Lancashire as a result of the American Civil War. There was a Union blockade of the Confederate cotton, so England, Lancashire lost its main business partner during the war. They didn't get any cotton from there. And they did try to get cotton from other places, India, the West Indies, but it was a different kind of cotton, and a lot of the mills were built around American cotton. So there was quite a lot of people out of work as a result of the American Civil War. Exhibit 37, Hawthorne Branch. The air's a lot clearer now there's the war in America. Now the mills are closed and the men work in quarries breaking rock. Robert's one of them. His feet are cut up, and it's soggy out there on the moors. The ground's so damp the wet climbs up his shins, and he comes home, his pants soaked, and that cough still there from all the dust in the mills. His body's not ready for such work, it's half killing him, but what can you do? You have to break rock or pick oakum before the guardians will grant relief. It took a long time before we even asked. We waited till we sold most everything we had. Our books, the clock, our Sunday clothes, my bonnet, the children's shoes, the chairs, the bedstead, even my ring. We got used to sleeping on a bag of shavings on the floor. Thing is, you can get used to almost anything. Not that everybody just waits for things to change. Though there are lots like that, and mostly when you line up, it's quiet. People are just tired and quiet. And you get your soup and your Indian meal and maybe a pair of new clogs or a blanket, and you go back home. Or you go, the women I mean, to the sewing classes and sit there with hundreds of others, darning and knitting on those benches to get your 8 pence. Or you just up and leave to America or Australia or to Yorkshire. There's lots now that have gone to Yorkshire. But in Stalybridge and Ashton, they got mad, they rioted. And here it's like that too. You can feel it in the air that something could go off any minute. Sometimes you just see it in the eyes. The shop round the corner's got nothing in it but a couple of empty jars in the window and a mug of buttermilk on the shelf. Mary went there with me and wrote her name out in the dust. I don't mean to say people don't help. Some do. People from London help, send blankets and penny stamps. And America, the North I mean, helps some. They sent us boxes and bags of bacon, bread, rice, corn, thousands of barrels of flour. That was 3 months ago in February, and it was bitter cold. Most who met the ship had nothing but holy shawls to wrap round themselves, but still they say 4,000 stood out there and cheered so loud it most shook the gray from the sky, though others said the money would have been better spent sending us to America. And not everyone's on the Union side. Some got together and wrote to Lincoln and said, "We still support you in the fight to end slavery." But others say different, and there are arguments out on the streets sometimes. I don't much care, to tell truth. I just want it to end. Today it was sunny at last, after such rain. On Tuesday it just pelted down, and the clouds yesterday were black, whipping across the city. And then today, sun. The singers came out, and the family with their instruments. They've got a fiddle and a penny whistle. These ones were from Blackburn. They had one of their caps out on the ground, and they played some psalms right near the change. Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? There was still the wind, and the cold sun was shining. The breeze mussed the hair on top of the old man's head. His daughter was singing, her voice kind of thin but pretty. It got too brisk, so I nodded goodbye and made my way to see my aunt. You know, she doesn't have much left, just her table, but on it, someone, I think maybe her son, Joshua, he's 12, he'd gone up to the moors, to Kersal Moor, and he'd brought back a hawthorn branch in full bloom. There it was on her table, the white blossoms like cotton fluff, all delicate and resting there in a pint jar full of water. Thank you. This book got a little crazy because, like I said, I thought it was just going to be about Manchester. And India came up because for thousands of years, India had been known the world over for its beautiful hand-woven cotton, especially muslin. And as a result of various reasons, there was it cost a lot for because it was cheap taxes for imports and expensive ones for exports. Basically, after industrialization, Lancashire kind of took the market in India. So a lot of the handloom industry wasn't fully destroyed, but first it started off with yarn coming in from factory-made yarn coming in from Lancashire, and eventually it was cotton that was then coming from Lancashire as well. So there was a decimation of the handloom weaver trade in specifically in Dhaka, which is now Bangladesh, but was India at the time. So it's quite a short section, but I couldn't ignore that part either because it was all part of the story of cotton, which is huge.
Well, that's kind of why I wanted to do it, is that I'd organized that particular group of poems in such a way that I really was interested in how they linked together, and I didn't want to kind of interrupt it too much with, explaining this or that in between. Let it create its own context as it goes, kind of thing. Yeah, well, the target audience for the book we wrote together is 5 to 8 year olds.
Yeah, we haven't
quite
done
distinct
any since.
from. Yeah, no, we haven't done any real.
Yeah, we had an idea that we would then start writing for all the nephews, but because the book was written on the occasion of the birth of the first grandchild in the family, my nephew. But we haven't written any together since, not even after our own child was born. So, yeah.
Could you read a few lines of the book you wrote together? The lines you each wrote on page? A little bit?
This beginning of it? Want to do the beginning?
Sure.
First page, maybe?
Yeah.
All right. Do you want me to read the lines I did, or how do you want
Yeah,
to
you read the first.
Okay, I'll read the
one,
lines
just
I did,
3
and then.
4.
Okay.
Just read a page.
You want me to? I'll do the first thing, and then you do the other
Yeah.
ones? Okay. The leaves were brown upon the ground, the sidewalks greasy gray.
Beans were measured by the pound, time tallied by the day.
The cats, they arched their silver backs, raccoons crept through the hedge.
The sky was blackest of the blacks, and the full moon's name was Reg.
He looked down to the town below, that city made of glass.
He beamed his gaze through one window. Now hear what came to pass. Or don't. Well, words tend to come first, and sound combinations and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm not interested in making nonsense, but I'm not terribly preoccupied with making sense. I'm more interested in making sound. As I believe Robert Frost said, let the sense take care of itself. But yeah, the sonic dimensions of words, as well as the different, what is technically known as polysemy, the different directions of meaning in which words go, are very much an interest of mine. Leslie, I found a beautiful lyric poet, and what interests me in other poets isn't necessarily what motivates the writing of my own poems, and my own poems go in many different directions too. The poems that I read today are quite different from the poems collected in my last book, which are quite different from those collected in the book before. So there's a strain of my work that is more readily identifiable with the tradition out of which Ken Leslie was working. But I found that I encountered first a sonnet of Kenneth Leslie's in an anthology in which I was published called In Fine Form, the Anthology of Canadian Form Poems. And it was one sonnet, and it was a beautiful poem. And at the time, I had never heard of Kenneth Leslie, and I thought, who is this? And then I later figured out that Kate Braid and Sandy Shreve, who edited that anthology, had probably found Leslie's poem in Margaret Atwood's Oxford Anthology of Canadian Verse, which was published in 1982, which contained that and a couple of other pieces by Leslie. At that point, this was the only work of Kenneth Leslie's in print. I subsequently encountered the same sonnet in an Oxford anthology published in England of sonnets exclusively by the English poet John Fuller. So there were these little bits, mostly one bit, of Kenneth Leslie's work that I kept bumping into. And I thought, there must be more than this. And so I looked him up on Abe Books and found out that JWD had a copy of his two books. He published a selected poems in 1971 with a small press in Quebec. Ladysmith Press, I believe it was called. And the editor of that book, Sean Haldane, left out a number of Leslie's more explicitly political poems. And Leslie was incensed by that. So he went on the following year to self-publish a selection of his work. And I got both of those books out and spent quite a bit of time with his work. And I wrote an essay on his poetry for a special issue of Arc Poetry magazine on forgotten and neglected poets. And the more time I spent with Leslie, the more I thought that it really was a shame that his work wasn't more widely available to readers. So I approached Tim Inkster at the Porcupine's Quill, and he had started a couple of years previously this series of books, The Essential X, so The Essential George Johnston, The Essential P.K. Page, others, and Margaret Addison and others. And I asked him if he would be interested in publishing The Essential Kenneth Leslie edited by me, and he said yes. So that was how I had the enormous privilege of bringing his work back into print. At the time, I didn't even know who to contact about copyright. I subsequently got in touch with his daughter. But I had the book ready for press before I learned who I was even supposed to be talking to about these things. Leslie, a fantastically interesting person, because he wasn't just a gifted poet, but he was an an activist of great note. He he was from Pictou originally, but he moved to the U.S. and he was a Christian and a socialist, and he came to prominence in the U.S. as an anti-fascist journalist and activist. He had a magazine called The Protestant, a left-leaning Christian magazine that had a circulation at its peak of about 50,000. And the editorials that he published in there and the speeches that he gave earned him quite a reputation, to the point that in 1950, or 49, in a special issue of Life magazine, he was named, along with some very famous people, such as Thomas Mann, Albert Einstein, and others, as one of 50 prominent dupes and fellow travelers of communism. So the fact that Leslie is an almost forgotten person in his own country and home province now, I thought was particularly regrettable. So
You would have gotten along with Rachel's great-grandmother?
I think so, yeah, they're kindred spirits.
Probably.
And and that was another thing about Leslie, was that it seemed like every woman who encountered him fell in love with him. He was dashing and eloquent, and and it caused he had that sonnet of his that I kept bumping into was part of a 28 sonnet sequence, and that was another thing that I thought was a shame, was that it's a beautiful poem on its own, but it really needed its proper context again, and that sequence, By Stubborn Stars it's called, which was also the title of his book that won the Governor General's Award in 1938. That sequence is quite autobiographical in nature, and it details a love triangle in which he was involved, and he was on the receiving ends of. He was on both the giving and receiving ends of relationship-ending affairs and that sort of thing. There was never a dull moment in Ken Leslie's life, be it personal, political, or poetic.
I don't know if I kind of think of myself as a bit more of an airhead than that, because what I do is I read all the history books and I just ignore all the careful analysis, and I just take all the images that I like and bring them into another genre. So in some ways I kind of felt like I was doing the historians a big disservice, but that's basically where I found the stories. It was a lot of history books, some very well written and some not so much. So I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges for me, was just having to go through works that weren't always very well written to find some of these stories. But it was an exciting challenge at the same time. And everybody that I name in the poems, such as the one about the cholera epidemic in Manchester, they're all real people. So that was a pleasure. There really was Long Jim, known for his skill in swallowing swords, and so I'd read some pretty amazing books that would name people, and that was part of it. I didn't make up any. There's very little that I've made up. So a lot of those stories did happen to people. In the factories, often people were only given buckets to piss in 3 times a day, so that they wouldn't leave their work and have poor productivity. So yes, so it's all history books, but I don't know that my analysis was, I just kind of ignored that. So, well, I love history, yes. Yeah. My first book was also, that one's about my great-grandmother, so that one was quite historically based as well. I think I did go to Manchester in 2000, but I didn't really start compiling notes for this book until about 3 years later, and then I never managed to make my way back there. But I'd say that my interest in Manchester and the Industrial Revolution started in an undergraduate English class I took, where we read Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. And so after I read that, I was curious enough from that book to, when I decided to go backpacking in England, I was curious enough to make sure that I went to Manchester. And then when I was in Manchester, I went to a couple wonderful museums there, and that also made me more interested, and then it just basically wouldn't leave my head after that. So I am part English. I mean, I have some ancestors in England, but not as far as I know in Manchester, further up north in Durham area, and further in the south as well. But yeah, I found the history of it so fascinating, and but that's how it all kind of started with Elizabeth Gaskell, I'd say, and then it just kind of kept growing from there. I took another course in graduate school, which was just a directed studies with a professor who gave me some of Friedrich Engels' descriptions of Manchester that he wrote in The Condition of the Working Class in England, that he wrote in 1844. I've got the title wrong. But anyway, some fabulous, fabulous descriptions of Manchester there. So it just kind of built up, and then the next thing I know, 10 years later, I have a book out. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Fabulous.